Before we begin, I'd like to announce that I'll be attending the 62nd Annual American Society of Dowsers National Convention June 8th through June 12th at Plymouth State University in Plymouth, New Hampshire. At the conference, I will be teaching a past life workshop on June 8th, and I will be a featured speaker on June the 10th. I will also be offering live one-on-one Akashic dowsing sessions at their wellness center, and Vital Bioenergetics Co-op members will be offering their products at a booth in the vendor area. For more information and to reserve your spot at this exciting event, please visit www.dowsers.org. And now for today's podcast. Welcome to High Vibes with your host, Bill G. At High Vibes, we're looking into what it means to be a fourth dimensional being in an ever-changing world. We hope that by listening to our podcast, you can feel a greater sense of peace and connection as we collectively raise our energetic vibration to the next level. And now for today's podcast. Hello and welcome to High Vibes. I'm your host, Bill G. And on today's podcast, I'd like to talk to you about one of the most important aspects of what I do as a spiritual counselor, which ironically also extends out to my other two jobs as well. And that aspect is the delivery of bad news. When we think about what it means to receive bad news, we immediately assume that the news we're about to hear is negative, that you're going to learn something that you don't want to know, and that the messenger of the news, especially if that person is a professional, they must take some degree of sadistic pleasure in turning your joy into despair. As a spiritual counselor and a professional tax preparer and even a teacher, the need to deliver bad news is part of my job, and believe me, I take no pleasure in its delivery. The trick, though, to delivering bad news is to remind the person that you're talking to that every piece of what they are about to perceive as bad news is actually an opportunity to do something different with their lives. As humanity's collective consciousness is awakening, we are now becoming more and more aware of the illusion of our own realities and constructs. As we become more aware of what's happening around us, our sense of comfort in all things normal gets stripped away layer by layer, until we are left with no choice but to do something completely different. Therefore, the receiving of bad news might just be the confirmation that you are looking for to give you the kick that you need to do something different than what you have ever imagined that you would never do before. This has been a particularly rough year in the tax office. After the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, how employees deduct taxes out of their paychecks has changed. Starting in 2018, less money was being withheld from their paychecks due to the elimination of the personal exemption. The intent of the law was that the government would hold less of your money so that you could spend it sooner rather than later. This resulted in more money being circulated in the economy and smaller refunds when people filed their taxes. In many cases, where a person generally would expect a refund, they were then discovering that they owe taxes that they had to pay by April 15th or pay interest and penalties. For families that make a modest income, this change was actually a good thing, because it enabled them to have more control over their finances rather than waiting for the government to pay them back in one large sum. For poor people without children, these changes have been especially difficult because these people generally count on getting refunds to make major purchases or even to simply pay for their tax preparation fees. I recall one middle-aged client that I was working with who discovered that he owed over $2,000 in taxes because his employer didn't explain to him how to properly fill out his W-4. And he couldn't even pay the $100 preparation fee because he only had $10 in his pocket. Now, a more callous individual may say that my client should have known better, that he should have been aware of the tax law changes and planned accordingly. But making such a comment is simply not fair, especially since most people aren't educated in the more than 5,000 pages of tax law currently on the books. Therefore, when it comes to taxes, most people have to trust that their employers know what they're doing, and when this turns out to be not true, they feel helpless to do anything about it. How I handle this situation is I pull up the new W-4 on the internet, and together we fill it out so that an adequate amount of taxes are withheld from their paychecks going forward. If they can't pay what they owe in taxes all at once, I also take them to the IRS website and show them how to set up a payment plan with the government. I also show them how to read their pay stub from their employer so that they can stay on top of their earnings and withholdings so that they're not surprised again when it comes time to file their return in the following year. In other words, I turn the bad news into an opportunity for my client to increase their awareness of the world and give them the tools that they need to take their own power back. In Akashic dowsing, we do the same thing. When a client comes to me, they are already generally aware that there's a problem in their lives, but they can't quite put their finger on it. All they know is that something isn't quite right, and they want an opportunity to take their power back. How we do this is we first set an intention, and then we allow High Self to guide the pendulum through the various charts and protocols to reveal what's going on. What gets revealed in the reading, especially in early sessions, is rarely good news. What is most often revealed is a long pattern, generally spanning several lifetimes, of programs and blocks that have prevented this person from living their best lives. What often surprises my clients is how deeply personal the readings and subsequent clearings are. What comes up is often extremely specific, deeply traumatic, and definitely not comfortable. In the counseling business, we often refer to this as shadow work, but unless you've experienced it for yourself, you really cannot fully appreciate how deep this new awareness cuts into everything you thought you believed to be the truth up until this point in your life. In other words, shadow work is ugly, it's painful, and it's definitely bad news. But just as the same with the taxpayer who discovers that his employer hasn't been withholding enough taxes from his paycheck, when we become aware of the shadow that has been haunting us for our entire lives without even realizing it, we then have a unique opportunity to increase our awareness of the world that we live in, and we can then take our power back. In spiritual counseling, it begins with conscious awareness of the subconscious programs that have been running for our entire lives. Now that the cat is out of the bag, as they say, the conscious mind can now make a different choice than simply following the script that the subconscious has laid out for it. In Akashic dowsing, we generally end each session with a meditation or an intention to clear our subconscious programs and replace them with more positive programs. We ask High Self to help do the work, but it doesn't stop there. That's because your high self isn't something outside of you. It's not some higher entity or power that is greater than yourself. It's you. Yeah, it's a more connected, wiser, and more positive aspect of yourself, but it alone does not have the power to change your life. Only you have that power through your own awareness of your programs and blocks and your choice to live your life without these programs and blocks, preventing you from expanding your knowledge and awareness of the world that we live in. My tax client has the free will to take the share together and throw it in the garbage and resign themselves to the belief that life is inherently unfair and they will be poor and victimized for the rest of their lives. Or they can take that form to their employer and demand that their paychecks be adjusted accordingly to their instructions. They can then keep track of their withholdings and hold their employers accountable. That sense of empowerment may expand their awareness to their full potential, and they may even expand their skills to get a better job, or better yet, start their own business and take control of their financial future. My Akashic dowsing clients have the same choice. They can choose to ignore what they've learned about themselves and go back to the way they lived their lives before. Indeed, some people are quite content to live in their own misery because it satisfies some karmic pattern of victimization and powerlessness. No amount of pendulum swinging, meditation, or chanting will be able to change any of that. Only by choosing a different path than the one we've already taken will anything be different. If you are ready to face your own bad news, I am ready to help you discover it. And with that knowledge, you too can make the choice to take your power back. Simply go to my website, www.vitalbioenergetics.com, and book a free 30-minute consultation with me. We'll talk more about what I do, and together we will see if Akashic dowsing is right for you. Now that this knowledge is in your energetic field of awareness, what choice will you make? Adane. Thank you for listening. For more information about Bill and Nina G, please go to www.vitalbioenergetics.com. See you next time.